Greetings and salutations. Wanted to offer up a yin practice for you today. Those of you that may not be familiar with yin, you can certainly Google all of this later. It's a slower, more still practice. It's not a flow. There's not a focus on endurance or strength. It's really more release and let go. It's going to get you a little bit beyond just muscle and into connective tissue. And there's an old saying in yin that your issues are in your tissues. So sometimes in this practice of yin, things can kind of come up for you. Emotions and stuff like that. And as they come up, you know, it's a good opportunity to look at them and process them and move through them, or continue to squash them down because that's worked, you know, this well for so long. I'm going to be a little bit more quiet in this practice because I want you to really be able to appreciate the stillness in each pose. And poses are going to be held pretty long, anywhere between 2 to 5 minutes in some cases. And we're going to do it a little bit differently in that we're going to do the poses on one side. It's about 4 or 5 poses. Then we'll do the other side. And then we'll get you into a nice Shavasana. Prop-wise, it's not going to be super intensive with props. I am sitting on the edge of a blanket, and I have a block that I will use nearby for a pose in just a moment. But we're going to start in child's pose. So go ahead and make your way onto tabletop. You could, if you have tender knees, you could bring a blanket onto your mat to kind of pad those knees. I'm going to get my timer ready. So just wiggle your hips back to your heels. Reach your arms forward. Let your forehead rest on your mat, or if that doesn't feel so comfortable, you could make a little pillow out of your arms where you rest your forehead here. Then take a deep breath in, open the mouth. Let's do that 3 more times. One more. Now in yin, your breath is really just riding its natural rhythm. You're not trying to control the sound, the depth, the duration, any of that stuff. You're just breathing in and out. If you get into a certain pose where you are meeting some resistance, then by all means, use that breath like a little laser. But for the most part, you're just breathing in and out. And if you notice that you're holding the breath, then this is a good time for you to check and see what part of the shape of this pose should I change. You're about halfway through on this child's pose, so if you wanted to take the knees wider, feel free. If you felt like you needed to bring them closer, feel free. Do a little scan to see where you can soften in this pose. Typically, the shoulder, the jaw, the brow area. About 1 more minute here. We're approaching the last 30 seconds of this pose. Now, when I cue you to exit the pose, don't rush out of it. You know, we hold these poses for a while, and muscle and fascia start to open up, and we don't want to just spring out of the pose. So we go out of it as mindfully as we came into it. You can start to extend through those arms and let your palms find your mat. We're going to make our way back up, very mindfully, back up into that shape of tabletop. Then when you get here, we have a counter pose or a rebound pose. For this one, we're going to flip the toes under and just take an easy down dog. And those knees could stay bent. You could come up and down on the toes. You could stay in this down dog for a few breaths, or you could go back and forth between tabletop and down dog. Let's just hold either one for about 4 more breaths here. And bring the knees back to your mat. We're going to move into another hip opener rather, called dragon pose. It looks like a low lunge. So you're just going to step your right foot forward between your hands. I'm going to go ahead and start the timer because this is kind of an unpleasant pose. And then when you come up, if you choose to come up, you could totally stay just folded over this leg in this shape. And this is a very narrow kind of lunge. Like you see my knee is over that ankle, my hip is over that knee. You could intensify this by moving this right foot forward a little bit. That's going to put the left knee a little bit behind that left hip. And maybe you bring your hands to that right leg. And if you get up here in sort of this mid-lunge, and you regret that choice, you could either just bring your forearms onto your elbow like this, or you could bring those hands back to the floor. And we're going to stay in this one pretty long. And if you have to back in and out of that lunge a couple of times, feel free. But eventually you do want to settle into a space of not moving so much in the pose, to where you can really start to get into, this case would be outer hip, a little bit of hip flexor, maybe even a little bit of hamstring. And I've still got the blanket under this back knee because I tend to have kind of bony knees. You're at about that halfway mark. If you're folded over the leg, let your chin rest on your chest. And let your head feel pretty heavy. Again, look into those places where you can soften in this pose. About 1 more minute. Now we're not going to do so much of counter poses or rebound poses in this sequence today, just because we're kind of just stringing these poses together on one side and then the other. But there'll be a big rebound between sides. Now we're going to transition this into a pose in a vinyasa class that we call pigeon. So you're going to walk your right foot over to the left side of your mat. So you bring that right knee down and scoot that left leg back. Hit things that might be on your floor. Then come down to forearms, elbows. We'll restart our timer here. This is going to be a fairly long pose. In fact, I think it's the longest pose we're going to do today. So don't feel like you have to jump right into this. Like you could just come down and stay up on your forearms, elbows. We're not even at 20 seconds yet. And then as you feel that hip start to open up, then maybe you come down, you make a little pillow out of your hands or your forearms, and you rest there. Now, if this is a shape that's not super comfortable for your hip or for your knee, you could make your way out of it. I'm going to come back into it in just a moment, but this is just for those of you that maybe don't feel so comfortable in that pose. If pigeon doesn't work for you, come onto your back, right ankle, left thigh, hug the leg in. It's very similar to the swan, benefit-wise, but it's a little friendlier for your knees. these hip openers, it can be very tempting to clench your jaw, to hike your shoulders up, or make angry eyebrows. So just kind of scan around that you're not doing any of those things. If you're wondering why these poses have different names in the Yin tradition, it's mostly out of association. That if we called it pigeon, you associate that with your yang practice, your vinyasa practice. And we want you to have a different association with the Yin practice. So you soften into it a little bit more. And swans are prettier than pigeons anyway. You're at about that halfway point. It can be very tempting to hold your breath in this pose or in any hip opener. So make sure that you're breathing. About a minute and a half left in this shape. But again, this will be the longest pose that we hold today. Remember in these hips, especially on this right side, this is kind of the stuff when you're trying to make a decision or, your practical stuff kind of comes up on this side. A little bit less than 30 seconds here. So start to walk your hands back towards you. If you're on your back, if you took that option, uncross your ankle from thigh and give that right leg a little hug. Now if you're in this forward swan pose, hop this left knee forward a little bit, and you're going to come over to that right hip so you can swing the legs out in front. Maybe give that right leg a little movement there. So I'm going to face you here. Sorry for the condition of my feet. We're going to do a pose called half shoelace. So what we're attempting to do is this right leg that was in that shape of swan just a few moments ago, that's going to be the leg that's going to be on top. Now, if this shape does not suit you for a knee or a hip reason, just bring your right foot to the inside of your left leg and let that left foot kind of flop open. You'll do a pose that we call half butterfly. So otherwise, try to get that right knee over the left. We're going to start with the spine pretty long, pretty tall, hands behind you. You're going to use the hands to tip you forward, and then keep trying to soften this left foot. Let your chin come down to your chest. This could be the pose for you right here. This is continuing this opening of this hip line. And then you can either bring your hands to the floor in front of you or even on top of that right knee and let yourself round into it. Let your chin come onto your chest. if you can reach that left foot with your hands. You could do that, but you're not using that to pull you forward. About halfway there. It's a very excited dog in my neighborhood. You got a little bit more than a minute here. If you took that rounding, see if you can hollow a little bit more in that belly and round over a little more. If you can let that chin rest on your chest and the shoulders kind of come forward, it really helps you to let go of a lot of stuff up and down that spine, particularly in the back of your neck. About 3 more breaths here. So if you round it over, first lengthen the spine and engage the belly. Then with your hands on the floor, you'll use that to bring the torso up. Now, we're not done with this right leg. This next shape is going to be a little interesting and a little bizarre maybe. So you're going to lean over to your left. You're going to swing this right leg behind you almost so that you're sitting up onto that heel. Now, I like to take a block at this point and put a block up underneath my left sit bone. So this is called half hero. Now you can stay in this shape. You're getting a nice little stretch across the top of that right quadricep. You could also bring this left foot to the floor. And then we're going to just bring the hands behind us, maybe just on fingertips or maybe down to the palms. Now some people will be able to take their elbows and forearms all the way down to the floor. I don't think I can do that today, quite honestly. Nope, that is not available to me today. So I'm just going to stay in this shape. And guess what? I will continue to live a very happy and full life. Now some people will get down to forearms, elbows. Some people will get all the way down onto their spine. And maybe they bring their arms overhead, kind of like a little picture frame, or you could even take the arms overhead and let the left hand take a hold of that right wrist while you're laying on your back. We're going to be in about 2 more minutes of this pose for a 3-minute total here, by the way. And then you could also play with the idea if you have the block underneath you of taking the block out of the way and just coming down onto the floor at that point. Just see how that feels for you. I think I prefer the block up under me. You got about 1.5 minutes of this shape. And then there's just one more pose for this leg. And then we do all of it again. Time flies when you're opening up your hips. Said no one. You got about 1 minute here. Now, if you went all the way down onto your back, walk back up to your forearms, elbows, and then just pause there for a moment. And those of you that are on your forearms, elbows, walk back up to your hands. And walk the hands back towards us until we're upright. If you had a block under that left hip, go ahead and move it off to the side. You're going to let yourself roll over to this left side. Watch out for anything or anyone on the right. You're going to bring that right leg back out in front. A little bit of movement there. You're going to bend the knees. Left leg's going to come on the bottom. Right leg is either going to come on top of that shin, or if you get there and you're kind of torqued like this, bring that foot to the floor and just go for a square cross-leg position. Fire log is the last pose we're going to do on this side. Reach back, get some junk out of the trunk. You can just bring your hands here and just let your head tip down. This could be the pose for you right here. You could bring a block out in front, maybe rest your elbows rather there, in your forehead and your hands. Now typically when we do fire log in an active class, these feet are flexed. We're not so much doing that here. They're kind of neutral, so you're not pointing or flexing. They're somewhere sort of in between. But if this starts to kind of tweak your knees a little bit, then flex both feet just to kind of give your knees some support. Those of you that feel like you want more of an opening in that right hip, you could walk your hands over to this left side and kind of fold it around here. I don't feel the need to do that today. You have a little bit more than a minute left on this side. Try not to judge your practice too much from or compare it to the last time you were on your mat. Like if you're here and it's not going as easily as your last time, no big deal. If you're on here and you're like, oh my God, I'm so much better than I was last time, I wouldn't get too attached to that either. Rarely stays that way. All right, so if you round it over, find that length in the spine first, engage the belly. Use the hands to press into the floor to help bring you up. All right, we're going to lean back into our hands, unless you have to use them like jaws of life. Bring your feet to the floor, and then a little bit of side to side with your knees. Oh my goodness. Wow. And to think we have the whole other side to do. So find your way back to that shape of tabletop. When you get to this tabletop, maybe there's some cat-cow. Maybe there's some wagging of the tail or some hip circles. I have a strong feeling your right hip is probably really craving movement more than stillness. And then let's find that shape of downward facing dog. Then back to that shape of tabletop. And then we're going to step the left foot forward between the hands. So back to that shape of dragon. So remember, you could stay here very kind of narrow. Your right leg is considerably warmer than your left at this point, and you might be like, I bet I could take my right knee all the way to the tail end of my mat. I would maybe not do that, just because, you know, you want to keep some semblance of symmetry here. And again, remember, you can bring the hands on top of your thigh and make your torso very tall. You could also kind of go, you know, thinking man, like that. Or at any point, hands can come back to the floor. Your right leg is just thrilled that it gets to be a supporting player at this point and no longer the star attraction. And this side will probably perform differently for you. It does for most of us. And you know, also kind of just depends on what's going on in your world right now. If you got a lot of emotional turmoil, get ready. If you're playing music in the background, you know, you're gonna want to avoid certain, you know, songs by like Coldplay or Sarah McLachlan. A little bit more than a minute here. The other side is a tad more cranky for me today. Now 2 more breaths in this shape. Now remember, that shape of swan does not suit your body. You're going to come out of this and come onto your back and do that version on your spine. Otherwise, you're going to walk that left foot over to the right side of your mat, and then just kind of let yourself wiggle down into this shape of swan, is what we call it, and yin. If you wanted something under that left hip, you could take a folded blanket and put up under there. You know, if you feel like you need that support. I tend to not do that very much because I like for that hip to eventually feel like it can open. And sometimes I feel like if I have something under it, I just kind of keep from approaching the edge of the pose, if you will. Yawning is good, by the way, in yin. It means that you're really letting go of some stuff. I have a friend who almost always falls asleep in this pose. Hopefully I will not. Wake up 20 minutes from now. We are at about the 2-minute mark here. Spoiler alert, means you have 3 more minutes to go. I really want to mutter a curse word here. Let's do it in my head. and a half here. I swear this side always feels like it takes longer. Less than a minute. About 10 more seconds here. If you took yourself pretty low in swan, you can go ahead and start to walk the hands back towards you. If you're on your back, and cross that top ankle. All right, so hop that knee forward a little bit if you're coming out of swan. So same idea that when you roll over to that left side, you're going to swing that right leg around in front. I'm just changing how I'm facing you here. Now your left leg is going to cross over that right. Again, almost that idea that you're trying to get that left knee over your right knee. If that's not available, left foot inside that right leg. Okay? So, big clunk there. Hands behind you to start. Use that to hinge you forward. Try not to overact that leg, or rather make it very active. And again, you could bring your hands to that left knee, bow your head and let yourself round a little bit, or your hands to the floor and round more. You're at that halfway point. Again, you want to kind of keep scanning to see this particular shape. It can be very tempting to kind of squeeze your glutes. It can also be very tempting to flex one or both feet. And again, as always, that jaw, eyebrow area, you know, you want space between the upper and lower jaw, space between those brows. About 30 seconds here. You can do it. And then find that length. You're going to bring the torso up nice and mindfully, not, you know, just rushing out of it. Lean to that right so you can swing this left leg around. And then you're going to roll over onto that left heel. Maybe you grab that block, put that block up underneath your right sit bone. You could also take a blanket and fold it over like one more time. So remember, you could stay with this right leg extended. You could bring that right foot to the floor, then lean back into the hands. You might come down to forearms, elbows. You might come all the way down. Don't get too attached to that whole idea about coming all the way down onto your back. There's a pretty good chance that if you are doing that, you've probably always been able to do that. And if you're not, there's a pretty good chance you've maybe never been able to do that. I think I could probably count on two hands how many times I've easily gotten down onto my back in this pose. Because a lot of times too, it's the fear factor or the fear of losing control that kind of prevents you from going all the way back as well. Again, if you're on your hands, you're still getting a great quad stretch of that left leg. Any expression of any of these poses is the pose. Same thing in a vinyasa format. You got a little less than a minute here. This is a great practice to incorporate once a week, once every 2 weeks, a couple of times a week. We want to find that balance between yin and yang, so that balance between active and passive. And so if you went down onto your back, make your way to your forearms and elbows. And then everyone just pause there. And if you're on your forearms and elbows, come back up to your hands. And then we'll start to walk the hands back towards us. Again, you can bring this block out of the way. Legs out in front for a little shake, a little movement there. Then that cross-leg position of that right shin parallel with this edge of your mat. Your left shin either in front or on top. If the last several minutes of these poses have not been particularly pleasant for your left hip, you might go to a cross-leg position instead of the stacked position. And then round into it as best you can here. Again, let that head feel kind of heavy. This chin to chest and these forward folds, it's so good for stretching out the muscles at the back of the neck, especially if you spend a lot of your time looking at your phone, because most of us tend to hold our head real heavy when we look at that phone. And again, you could always walk your hands over to the right side if you were trying to get a little bit more into this left hip. Almost to that halfway mark. Again, I swear the left side seems to just go slower. This practice today is centered mostly around hip and spine because those are the areas where we tend to congregate a lot of our tension, our emotions, our resentments, our grudges. So when you start to open up into those tissues, it's kind of like kicking up a hornet's nest a little bit. And those tensions and grudges and resentments come to the surface. But a lot of times they're coming to the surface because you're ready to do some work around it. You're ready to let go of some of that stuff. And then we're going to roll up. Oh, bring those hands behind you, feet to the floor. Side to side with the knees. You could pause here. You could press those hips up into the sky. That might feel really good on the hips on the back side. And then we're going to come down onto our seat. We're going to do a couple of forward folds. First one we're going to do is called dragonfly. So it's a wide leg forward fold. And your legs are open as wide as you can. You're not trying to make yourself a wishbone. You're not trying to having kind of tug of war. And your feet are pretty passive. And you could just stay like this. I will often bring my hands to my or my shins rather, and just use that to kind of help me get forward a little bit. Now you could stay with your hands in front and your spine pretty long. And again, you're not really flexing the feet. You're just letting them kind of roll open here. There's another forward fold on the other side of this, and that one I will round into that one. So on this one, I like to keep it a little bit more active. This is a lot of inner thigh, a little bit of hip flexor, and you might get a little bit of hamstring as well. If it was available to you, you could walk your hands way out, maybe getting your belly and chest onto the floor. I don't do it either. A little bit more than a minute here. But you know, if we do very active exercises, like if we're runners, weightlifters, CrossFitters, it's important to have a rest day within somewhere of that practice, a day where you allow yourself to recover. It's the same thing with yoga. If we, power yoga, vinyasa, flow, ashtanga every single day, you got to have something to counter that. So this yin practice, again, if you do it once a week, once every couple of weeks, it's a good way to counter all of that stuff, that constant sort of, chaturangas is a lot in our shoulders and biceps, chairs, all that kind of stuff. This is a good way to make some space around those muscles. Like 20 more seconds here, you guys. All right, so then we're going to bring the torso up. You're just moving in and out of this very mindfully. You can bring your legs back to the center, but not together. Maybe hip width apart, maybe shoulder width apart. We're going to go into another forward fold, this one called caterpillar. So roll your feet in and out a couple of times, and then just let them land wherever they land. Usually that's rolled out. And then your hands are going to just plant alongside your legs. You're going to hinge forward, and you're just going to let that chin rest on your chest. You're going to let the back round here. So breathe into that spot between those shoulder blades. Again, this is so good for that up and down the spine, to open up those little channels, those meridians, to get into that connective tissue. a minute here. And then you're going to flex your legs, engage them a bit. Find that length in the spine. Bring your torso back up. You can either keep your legs where they are. I like to find a cross-leg position. Let your eyes close. Deep breath in and out. All right, we're going to do two more poses. One is going to be a supported version of bridge pose. You could do that either with a folded blanket or two. I'm going to use a block for the purposes of it. And we're just going to be in it for about 2 minutes. So find your way onto your back, knees bent, feet on the floor. You're going to take your block, you're going to lift up your hips or whatever you're using, and put that underneath your low back tailbone. You want to make sure your butt feels like it's being supported in this pose. And then we're going to bring the arms alongside of us, turn our palms up. Gaze is up at your ceiling. Let your eyes close. Start here. Just let this, kind of feel this out before you go any further. And then if you feel like you need more, you could lift the hips up and turn that block up a notch. Just know that as the higher you get on the block, the more you're going to feel that in that low back hip flexor area. And also depending on what kind of block you're using, you may not feel as much support there. You can walk your feet a little further away from you. You could even take them out onto your mat. So it's kind of like upside down canoe pose here. And we're going to walk our feet back to our mat. Lift your hips just enough to take out that support. Bring it up maybe to the top of your mat so it'll be out of your way. Wrap your right leg over your left. Slide your hips over to the right. Let your knees drop over to the left. Nice little spinal twist, just for like 5 breaths. Come back to the center. Switch it up. Left leg on top. Hips over to the left. Ooh, knees over to the right. I got a good pop on that one. And then the legs coming back to the center. Uncross them. Pause here. Maybe hug your knees into your chest. Maybe go for a happy baby pose. And then give yourself about a 5 to 10 minute Shavasana here. It's a good place to stop and just extend the legs and arms out and sort of feel the echo of your practice, the echo of the poses. Maybe you are able to see where you have space where once was closed off. But just stay where you are with your eyes closed, your limbs heavy onto the ground, your breath soft. I appreciate this time with you today. Namaste.